today's a really big deal for me. I'm gonna stop fangirling, I promise, at some point. But today on the podcast of 22 at the Lips, I have with me Eric Bauer. Eric Bauer is not only an incredible speaker, he is phenomenally smart and has his own podcast. It's called FlightBridgeEd. That's kind of where I found Eric. I've been following it ever since. Very influential stuff. But anyways.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, Eric, you obviously do a lot of stuff, flight medic, instructor, speaker, all this good stuff. But if you want to tell the people who you are, what you stand for, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I have been in EMS 32 years now. It's been a long time. It's went by in a blink. I was the kid that watched Emergency, and I wanted to be a paramedic from the earliest time that I can remember. My dad was a police officer. My stepdad was a firefighter captain. And so I was raised around both sides. And I felt at an early age, those were the heroes that I wanted to be. And I'm really proud to have gone into that role, just an amazing career, the experiences that I've been able to share with people, my partners, other mentors, so been amazing.
Absolutely. One of the things I kind of want to harp on are the aspect of going from the ground medic to the flight medic, which is not an easy process by any means. No offense, not my thing. I love to learn the content, but being in the helicopter, it's claustrophobic. It's terrifying for me. But for the listeners, what was your transition aspects and like the difficulty of it going from, and like the educational parts, going from being on the ground, on the street, roughing it up to now you're doing flight, you're doing those very critical, very extensive hospital transfers. You're going on scene as like honestly, for me at least, how I look at it, the savior of the flight ground medics. So if you want to tell like your process, how you got there, how you got to this level, things like that.
Yeah. My road to being a flight paramedic was really by accident. I never really dreamed to be a flight paramedic. I actually accepted a supervisor role with Mercy Flights in Southern Oregon, where I'm from. And part of that role, I had to be cross-trained as a flight paramedic. So once I had that bug, I remember the first time I jumped on that aircraft, I was hooked. Clinically, I always wanted to be challenged. And so, I realized, I guess I just didn't have a clue what was out there. So once I started flying, I fell in love with it, and I immersed myself in becoming better. But that was 2003, right? That was a long time ago. And really things have gotten a lot more complex, right? Fast forward, what I would recommend for people entering into flight medicine, I think we have seen paramedic education improve. The bar is being raised higher and higher and higher, right? And I did a podcast on a subject where I said it might be better sometimes to have a 3 or 4 year paramedic than a 20-year paramedic. And I got some hate emails over that, right? And I wasn't doing that to offend a 20-year medic or a 20-year nurse. But I think if we do this a long time, some of us become really calloused, and we lose the ability to think outside the box. And we're so set in our ways that we're not willing to learn new things. And medicine has just changed so much over my career, let alone, the last 10 years. And so a 3-year paramedic, a 4-year nurse, they're so eager to learn, right? That is the key, is you have to be curious. And I think it starts with paramedic level education. If we can train our paramedics to a higher standard, to maybe give them a little bit of critical care curriculum, sprinkle it in with National Registry or wherever you're taking your paramedic education, if it's Canada, if it's overseas, whatever that looks like, we increase the knowledge level. And I truly think that critical care, as I've gotten older and taught so many amazing students, critical care is about maybe it's looking at a situation, looking at a patient, and knowing what not to do. Looking at a situation and knowing, you know what, this patient might need intubated, but I'm going to hold off because I'm going to resuscitate first. And why would I resuscitate first? You know, mortality goes up exponentially. You have a hemorrhaging trauma patient that you RSI without resuscitating, 47% mortality rate, right? It drops down by 20-some% if you resuscitate first. And a lot of these patients, once you resuscitate them, you don't have to intubate them anymore. So it's understanding things to a broader perspective to where you can make better clinical decisions. And I think even for the nurse, the paramedic working on the ground, 911, if you have critical care education under your belt, even if you have no desire, like you said, to fly, it allows you to make better clinical decisions, right? Your stress level comes down. You understand things better. You see things. It's like as we get older, I always say we take the blinders off. And as we get older, based on failures in our life experience, we see things clearer, right? And so that's how I look at starting as an EMT and progressing to a paramedic. I think we give them more. And that prepares them to transition much easier.
So what would you say is something that, especially like most of the people that want to be flight medics, they go into paramedic school with that idea, or they go into EMT school even, and they're like, I want to be a flight medic. What would you say is, or what would you give as advice of somebody to kind of, like you're talking about, of keeping everything fresh and like your 3 to 4 year medics as flight medic, that kind of aspect? What is some advice to kind of help people go through that process? Because it's a little bit of that complacency, like you're talking about, for 20-year medics, or like, I'm gonna be straight with you, my guy. Like, I'm about to hit my 2-year marker as a paramedic, and there are some days I'm like, forget this. What is some advice to like helping keep that fresh mentality alive, even as you're going through the trudge and drudge of this field?
I mean, I think each one of us is a little different, right? We're all driven a little different. We have different, maybe good habits, bad habits. You know, I found really early on, if I had a goal in mind, I would type it out. I would put it on the wall somewhere where I would see it and slowly check those boxes, right? And have that hunger constantly. So if you go into EMS knowing you want to be a flight paramedic, then you can't become complacent. You have to constantly feed yourself, right? And I think we have so much out there nowadays, social media. I mean, I look back when I was an early paramedic, we didn't have any of that stuff. I mean, I had a freaking Palm Pilot, for gosh sakes, right? And I don't even know what I used that for, right? But it was cool, you know? and now everybody's got smartphones, and we have apps on our phones. We have all this stuff. There's so many podcasts out there. I just always try to say, you know, utilize your time wisely. Have good time management. Try to feed yourself with something every day. Accomplish something every day. If you're going to go work out, run on the treadmill, go for a jog, listen to a podcast. I listen to podcasts still when I mow my yard. I've got 6 acres. I get on my zero-turn mower. I put my earbuds in, and I just listen to podcasts, right? And that's relaxing to me. If I'm driving to the office, I listen to a podcast. So I try to do that every day. I try to feed myself. And then over time, it's like building a foundation. It's like putting blocks. You're like, wow, a year's up. Man, I have way more knowledge than I did before. I always use this adage when I talk: never hope for it more than you work for it.
That's
so
good.
Think about that, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we hope for it, and we don't put in the work. And I think you got to put in the work. You got to know there's going to be those sleepless nights. There's going to be those times where you don't want to study, you don't want to listen to podcasts, you want to rock out, right? Listen to Beyonce or whoever, right? And Taylor Swift, all those Swifties out there. There's a Swiftie right there. You know, and that's all right. You know, I try to accomplish something every day, and then all of a sudden you look back in the rearview mirror and you're like, wow. So you just have to have those goals. I think you also need to prepare yourself. What I have seen so many times in the industry is somebody coming into the industry, getting hired as a flight nurse or flight paramedic. They don't have any critical care experience. And so I think you go through orientation, and there's a lot to orientation with these flight programs. There's a lot of requirements, a lot of education. And then on top of that, you have to get an advanced cert. You got to get your FPC. You got to get your CFRN. So if you can get that before you get hired, that is just one less thing that you don't have to worry about. And that is a big thing, right? You have to have that within 2 years of hire based on CAIM's guidelines, meaning if you don't have it at that 2-year mark, you're terminated. And now all the work you did is gone. So if you can go into that and then just focus on learning to do your job, you got your FPC, you got your CFRN, learn to do your job. That is great. Other certification, if you can get NRP. NRP is a required certification that most people coming into the flight side don't have. So anything you can do to prepare yourself and get those alphabet cards that you might not have on the ground, that you have to have as a critical care provider, is just going to reduce your cognitive load when you're in the orientation process.
100%. And I appreciate what you're saying about like the not being complacent, because especially, I mean, honestly, in this field, why you sign up, if you're not aiming to be the best provider that you can be, like, what are you going to do? Like a subpar provider? And like,
right.
How are you benefiting your patients? Because at the end of the day, it's the knowledge that you know, it's the extent of the knowledge that you know, all of that stuff, but it's also that main goal of like, not only are you taking care of a patient, that is somebody's life in your hands.
Yeah.
And one thing that I kind of remind myself is, if it's my family member, which it sounds cheesy, just being honest, you know, if this was my dad here, if this was my mom, my brother, whatever, but it kind of takes on like that different personal role, just because you're not looking at it as just another chest pain, just another diabetic call, but it's keeping that mindset that like, this is somebody. And if you're not training to the best of your ability, you'll fall. What is it? If you're not rising to the level of your expectation, you'll fall to the level of your training.
Love that.
Right?
Yeah.
So absolutely. Big part of that is immersing yourself. So with podcasts, that's my go-to hands down every time. Keeping up and by listening to podcasts, keeping up your level of training, which is what FlightBridgeEd does. But 100% my guy.
It's often like you just don't know what you don't know. When I hear from a lot of people, what I love, you know, I started FlightBridgeEd in the FlightBridgeEd podcast. I tell the story. I never meant it to be a business. I thought I would teach critical care. Need to bring evidence to everybody in the world, and everybody should have the same level of information. That's why I started it. It was to try to bring everybody's knowledge base to a higher level. And so, you know, what I would also say is you got to have humility. And I think it's all right to be confident. It's all right to understand your job, but man, you got to always remember, even if I feel like I've been successful in life, there's always somebody smarter, always somebody that has more experience in something or has a talent that I don't have. And so you just have to be teachable, right? And that's probably the thing I see with younger. I was probably the same way, right? Because you got to be humble and be teachable and just soak up the information from people around you that have done it before you.
Something that I tell all my friends in EMS, and like, I'm not gonna lie, this one partner that I had at one point in my career who was absolute trash, I looked at him, I was like, dude, pride has no place in EMS. Absolutely none. Like you're saying, there's always gonna be somebody better, but also like, it's not a competition.
Right.
Like at the end of the day, ain't nobody impressed besides the patient that you're taking care of.
Yeah.
So that's all I got, my guy. I'm not gonna keep you long.
That's good.
We're at the EMS 2023 conference, and Eric has to go speak, but he humbled himself enough to come and talk to me. So, dude, I appreciate you. Any advice you have to new providers in school, anybody and everybody in between? What you got?
What I tell everybody is humility leads to endless learning. If you're not humble, you're not going to listen. You're not going to hear. You're not going to take those opportunities that are all around us all the time to learn. And, you know, learning becomes very easy if you can do that. You just gotta put your pride aside, and try to be the best version of you and get better every day.
Which is hard because everybody wants to hear the good things that they're doing and about themselves, but that humility sandwich is also equal parts.
People will respect you more.
Yeah.
Yep.
Understanding what you're good at and what you're not good at and how to improve. So appreciate you, Eric.
Thank you.
It's been an honor. Go find his podcast. Go find his stuff. FlightBridgeEd, an incredible resource. And as I end every single episode, so with that.
The 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.